Hey, in today's episode, we're tackling a topic everyone can relate to: dealing with difficult conversations at work. Whether it's addressing issues with a colleague, speaking up to a manager, or involving HR, these conversations can be tough. Our guest is here to share insider tips on how to approach these situations with confidence, staying composed under pressure, and turning challenging discussions into opportunities for growth. If you want to master the art of tough workplace conversations, you don't want to miss this episode. Welcome to the Transparent HR Podcast, where we aim to empower individuals with transparent HR insights, fostering career opportunities, and navigating workplace success for all. It's your host, Prince Tate, and I am super excited that you are listening to the fourth episode of this podcast. Don't forget to like, to share with a friend, and subscribe to get all of the notifications for our upcoming episodes. This really helps us out to bring awareness to others who really need HR insight for their career. We want you to also know that if you have career or workplace questions, feel free to submit them by clicking the link within the description below. Again, click the link within the description listed below. Also, if you feel that you can add value to people's lives and you like to be a guest on the show, you can also fill out the link within the description below that says be a guest. Let's introduce our guest. Today, we have none other than Nikita Turner. Nikita, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic. Super excited that you are a guest with us today. I've been trying to get you on for at least the last 12 months, even though we just started a few months ago. Nikita, tell us a little bit about yourself. Our listeners want to know a little bit about you before we get started.
Okay. Well, like you said, I'm Nikita Turner. I've been in HR for over 20 years. And The reason I chose HR is because I'm passionate about people, helping people, making sure at our companies we have a great culture and take care of our people, but also helping people develop, whether that's developing our frontline employees or helping leaders become better leaders, just helping each person become their better self.
I really love that. You know, nowadays, it's hard to really find people who are passionate about people, right? Passionate about helping people. And that's also one of the reasons why I joined the HR field, the HR industry, is to help people. And we know that once you help people, you help the people in the organization, which the people is the organization, right? And so you help people and overall help organizations to become better each and every day. And so it's great to hear that, Nikita. Outside of HR, what do you love to do?
Well, I love doing whatever I can to enjoy life, love to relax, travel, and I love animals. I have a couple of fur babies of my own. You may hear them answer a couple of questions. I have Jax, he's about to be 14 years old, my Shih Tzu. And then I have Nala, who's a little over a year old. I also have two grandkitties. They are Theo and Potato.
Okay, Theo and Potato. Okay, I love it. I love it. Look, just let them know they could be on the show, so they don't have to hide. So you may hear. Okay, we may hear some of them today, and that's okay. That's okay. Well, let's get into our career quote of the day. It says, "Be yourself. Everyone else is already taken," by Oscar Wilde. This is so hilarious to me because it's so important for people to remember. Be yourself. So many times we aspire to be like other individuals, whether that's our mentors, whether it's superstars, people that we simply look up to, our mothers, our fathers, family members, right? But it's important to remember, be yourself. It's so important because there is no one who is as authentic as you are, right? And so when you are yourself and when you bring yourself to the workplace, that's when people can get connected to you, right? That's when people they begin to realize like, oh my goodness, I love being around this person, whether it's because you're funny, whether it's because you're just straight and formal, whether if it's just you have a unique personality. It's important to be yourself because that is what people want to fall in love with, the real
Exactly.
you. What you think about this quote, Nikita?
I absolutely I love that quote because you can only be happy if you're being yourself. So,
Right.
to thyself be true. But also, when we talk about diversity in the workplace, people most time think about, gender or ethnicity,
Hmm.
but it's also a diversity of mindset. So, your authentic
I love
self,
it.
yes, being your unique self, it adds a special flavor to your organization, to your
I
team.
like that. A special flavor.
Yeah.
A special flavor. I love that. Sometimes one of the challenges that I see a lot, I mean, I'm just talking about me, is, I'm young, right? And I go in meetings, I'm a part of conversations, and I'm the youngest one in the room. And I always wonder, are they going to listen to me? And I've come into my career at a point where, guess what? I embrace all of me,
Yeah,
right? And I'm able to go into a room now in a meeting with confidence on my shoulders, right? And so
absolutely.
that's why I think it's important to be you,
Yeah,
because guess what? People want they want to know you and they want to get to know the real you. Real quick, Nikita, before we get into today's discussion and today's topic, we have the new transparent HR T-shirts that I have on right now, and I'm super excited about it because I never thought a day in my life I would wear a T-shirt with my face on it. So, if our listeners, hey, if you want a transparent HR T-shirt, reach out to me. If the demand is there, we'll order some more and get some out and see how we can ship it out to you. But I just wanted to let our listeners know that we do have transparent HR T-shirts, and it
awesome.
says on the bottom, just being
Just being true.
transparent. So I wanted you all to know that as well. So let's get into our discussion today, where we'll be talking about different things regarding difficult conversations, right? In our last episode, we talked about why and when employees should come to see HR,
Mhm.
but we know that oftentimes it's important for employees to try to address certain situations with their colleagues, their managers, or whoever it is in the organization. And we know that sometimes it's difficult to have these conversations, right?
Mhm.
But before we even get into the difficult conversations, we know that sometimes there are reasons why you need to have difficult conversations,
Yeah.
such as conflict that arise within the workplace. I did a workshop in my organization, and we talked about workplace conflicts. What are some things that may cause conflict to happen? And one of the number one things we talked about was poor communication. A
Yes.
lot of times people just don't know how to communicate, right? The next thing is different values and interests, right? Maybe you believe in a different religion, maybe you have a different political party that you follow, right? And so those are different interests and values that may be different from other people. The next thing is scarce resources. We know it's always challenging when organizations don't have enough tools and resources for their employees. I always laugh because in one of my previous organizations I worked for, we would always get complaints or hear complaints from employees who are arguing about a forklift. They want a specific forklift that they always use, and then sometimes it's not enough forklifts. It's so hilarious to me, right? But when we realize that resources matters, we'll look at it differently and ensure that it's there for the employees that are working day to day. The next thing we look at is personality conflicts. we know that people have different personalities, and that can cause conflict within the workplace that will lead you to needing to have a conversation with a team member, with a peer, right, with a colleague. And then always poor performance. I always share in orientation wherever I go this example. We always know that one employee who goes to the restroom over 45 minutes, and it seems like, they, always come back with attitude, right? When it's like, no, hey, you've been in the restroom and I've been, covering you for the last hour. Where have you been? Right? So poor performance, and that's just an example. But Nikita, I want you to answer this question. What are the most common types of difficult conversation employees may face at work? And how should they prepare for tough conversations, whether it's addressing it with a colleague, addressing it or stepping up to their manager and having that conversation, or even just involving HR in that concern, in that complaint that they may bring?
Okay, so some of the common issues there are, like you mentioned, personality
Hmm.
conflicts. That is the
Mm,
most common, especially peer to peer, because we
right.
all come from different, well, going back to diversity, different backgrounds, different homes,
Hmm.
and our personalities are just naturally different.
It's
And
different.
so,
Yeah.
exactly, which also contributes to our communication style, which can contribute
Mm,
to misunderstandings. So that's
right.
the most
Right.
common with peer to peer. But also when someone's not carrying their load, they're part of the load
Mm,
and work. That's
gotta
another
carry your
very
weight.
common one. Exactly, peer to peer. When it comes to managers and issues, it's again, it can be personality issues. It may
Hmm.
be this one employee that I just don't understand why we can't just get along, or this person just
Right.
doesn't seem to listen to me. It also, like you mentioned, performance. If it's performance or behavioral issues, then the
Hmm.
manager has to have that difficult conversation as well. And then there are some very sensitive ones, such as
Mm,
hygiene
mm,
conversations where that has
right.
been brought forward to HR or to management and or by some of the peers,
Hmm.
and it has to be addressed.
And
And
those are always difficult,
very, yeah,
especially when you have to go to someone and say, "Hey, your hygiene."
yeah, exactly, yeah,
Those are always difficult because you just never know what their response is and how they'll feel
exactly,
about it.
yeah,
But I think also, and I may steal your thunder here, but a lot of times when that type of issue is addressed, we end up finding that it's other issues that's going on, such as
absolutely,
that person may end up, we may find out they're homeless,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so how do peers or managers deal with that?
So with those type of issues, well, first of all, in any conversation, you approach it with respect, and
Mm, respect.
especially those sensitive topics. And I'll start
Hmm.
with the peer first. As a peer, if you have that conversation, then make sure you're having it with the person, not with your other
Hmm.
peers. Don't make it the topic of the department. Out
Right.
of respect for that person, if you notice something, talk directly to them, but approach it
Hmm.
delicately because you don't know what's going on behind it. Like you
And
said, it could be,
yeah,
go ahead.
yeah, and you don't want it to become a workplace gossip,
Yeah,
because it
yeah,
starts with a conversation in hopes
yeah,
that maybe I can go to this person and they'll be
mhm,
confidential about it.
yeah,
Or maybe I could go to this person, I'm having an issue with uh,
yeah,
one of my peers, and I go to my other peer and talk about it. And you really want to just try to figure out how to address it, but you don't know how to have that conversation, right? So I think what you said, right, addressing it with respect,
yeah,
I think that's key.
yeah,
But also, if you're that person that they're talking to, keep
yeah.
it confidential.
Absolutely,
Keep it
definitely,
confidential.
yes, sir.
Yeah. So as team members try to address concerns with their peer, or even their manager, what may be something that the organization should provide to their department or to the manager, or even as you onboard?
Hmm.
And I'm gonna give you a hint. something as a personality assessment, what are some things that they should do to provide to make these conversations a little bit easier?
So the personality assessments, such as the DISC assessment, those are
Hmm.
excellent tools, not only for leaders, but also peer to peer. Because when you learn about your
Mm,
teammates or when you learn about your subordinates or your leaders, you know how to approach them. You know how they prefer to
mm,
be communicated with, and you get a better understanding of how they tick.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so you understand them, they get to better understand you. And that, if you use the tools, then that
right.
automatically leads to better communication.
Right. You look, I love the DISC assessment because it's pretty accurate.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
the thing about it is, like you said, it gives you an opportunity to figure out how your team members communicate, or even your leader, how they like to communicate, so
right.
that when you're dealing with just work or even issues as they arise, you know
Mhm,
how to address that person. I think is so important. So if you're listening today, maybe you want to talk to your leader about, hey, can you introduce a DISC assessment? There are other assessments that are
mhm,
free.
mhm,
The DISC assessment, unfortunately, I don't think it's free. But there are other personality assessments like the color assessment, where it's like orange, green, yellow, red, that are free, that your team could take. And I think it's important that you utilize these assessments to really help bridge the gap and help build the team together a
yeah.
little bit better. So as we have these conversations, right, these difficult conversations within the workplace, Nikita, tell us what may be some strategies employees can use to stay calm and composed during these conversations, especially when we know that sometimes these conversations can get very emotional.
So definitely take a breath, take a beat,
Hmm.
um, before you get into it
Yeah.
or before you respond. Always think before you speak. And then if you feel that it is getting heated or that you may be
Mm,
not be able to maintain your composure, then it's okay to respectfully say, okay, let's just stop for a moment, take a break, and resume later. The important part of that, though, is you resume. Don't
mm,
just leave it out there lingering. So you take a break, and
right.
if you need to bring someone else in to help mediate that conversation, then you do that, but make sure the issue gets addressed and cool heads prevail. Definitely. But definitely
Mm.
just think it before you speak and taking a breath, taking a beat before you go into that.
Yeah, yeah. I think another thing, if you're uncomfortable with addressing certain things within the workplace, having certain conversations, I think another thing that they can do is maybe bring somebody mutual with them in that conversation.
Mm-hmm,
And guess what? HR is that neutral party,
mm-hmm,
even though sometimes we don't do it enough. Of course, we have so many things that we're working on, so
mm-hmm,
many fires we're trying to put out.
mm-hmm,
But I often, as an HR partner,
mm-hmm.
I often would bring people together to have difficult conversations, especially
Right.
if they haven't had a conversation. One of the first things that I talked about in my last episode was when employees come to HR and they complain on someone, the first question we ask is, have you addressed or brought this to the person's attention? And I think it's so important that people at least attempt to communicate, right?
Yeah.
At least attempt to communicate, to address that concern to that person or that party that needs to be addressed, or just bring it to their attention. Nikita, from an HR perspective, when employees come to you, what may be some other things that you may share with them?
Well, of course, first I want to understand the issue and just the facts. We've talked about that before.
Mm,
Just understand the facts. Leave out your emotions about it because we need to
yeah,
understand the basics, the black and white, and then
yeah.
go from there. Um, like you mentioned, have they spoken with the other person? If they have not spoken with the other person, I need to understand why. And
Mm,
most of the time, we need to
Yeah.
redirect them back to that person. If there is a legitimate reason that they don't feel comfortable addressing it with that person, then
Hmm.
we'll navigate that, whether it needs to be a manager involved or if HR should be involved, so that we can still address the issue.
Hmm.
And we want to ask also their part in this. For example,
Yeah.
if I come and say, well, Daniel's just been really rude all day. He's been in a bad mood all day. So I need to understand exactly what occurred, because sometimes people leave out their part. So I need to
Mm.
know both
There's
sides of the
always two
story.
sides.
Exactly,
Right. There's
exactly,
always two sides to the story.
exactly.
Yeah.
So those are the questions I would ask before we dig into the meat of things and decide which way to go with it.
Yeah. So let me share this example. There's one time that I was help mediating a conversation, a difficult conversation between a manager and employee,
Mm,
and I mean, everywhere I've worked, I've had to do this. So, just one example, we had a manager who wanted to have this difficult conversation because she did not have a conversation with her uh, employee about maybe some things that weren't some behavioral things or just some things that weren't coming across as great, right?
mm,
And during the meeting, I noticed that she would just, interrupt the employee as she was speaking,
yeah,
and not giving that employee an opportunity to really voice their concern or their side of the story,
mhm,
as what we
yeah,
were stating. And it got so bad. The meeting was so unproductive. And you're probably thinking, well, with HR in the meeting, right?
yeah,
I had to pause in the meeting and say, hey, let's ensure that we're listening to each other, that we aren't just listening to respond, but we're
right,
listening to get an understanding of what's
exactly,
going on, of what this issue is that we're talking about today.
right,
And so a lot of times I like to start off my meetings as an HR person with setting ground rules for both parties. It doesn't matter who reported it. We're going to make sure that we are staying respectful, as you stated, in this meeting, and that we're giving each party an opportunity to talk and to release their side of the story. And then towards the latter part of the meeting, that's when we come together and we start discussing ways to bridge the gap or ways to address the situation.
right,
So, after doing all of that, the manager still was interrupting the employee to where I stood up and I said, "This meeting is over." And I dismissed both individuals. I said, "Hey, we cannot continue to have this meeting
right,
because it's not effective."
exactly,
The employee walked out of the office, and the manager looked at me and said, "Hey, so what's next?" And I said, "I have nothing to say."
right,
Because in that moment, I just couldn't believe it. Like, you're a member of leadership and
exactly,
you're not giving your employee an opportunity to talk, right? But we had a follow-up meeting and had a follow-up conversation, and successfully had an opportunity to bridge the gap and mend the issue that was going on. So that's just an example of difficult conversations, and I think that's why employees sometimes don't like to
yeah,
have meetings with their managers, because sometimes managers feel like, hey, I'm the leader, I can do what I want to do.
right.
What has been your experience in that, Nikita?
Well, difficult conversations, I've been a part of. Since you talked about a leader and their employee, I'll
Hmm.
talk about peer to peer. And we previously discussed keeping emotions in check, basically.
Mm,
Um, it We've had occasions where there have been employees sometimes just brought in from the floor by a manager, and we don't know from HR perspective what's going on.
hmm.
We have to be brought up to speed, but emotions are already high. Employees may already be disagreeing. So,
Right.
of course, we attempt to get the situation calmed down with everyone in the room to understand. If necessary, we will separate the employees, and one member of management or HR will go with one employee and another with the
Mm,
other employee, so that we could get an understanding of what really occurred, get an
hmm.
understanding of both perspectives to figure out, where the breakdown in communication was.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like the example we talked about a little bit ago. If you can't take a step back and calm down, if it's already escalated, then you may have to separate the employee.
Right.
And ideally, you want to get it de-escalated to a point that you can bring everyone back together and have a discussion to resolve the issue. That would be the best case scenario, and it usually does work out that way. A lot of times when people feel they're actually being heard, then they will
Mm-hmm.
calm down and cooperate.
Okay. Well, Nikita, do you have any last minute insider tips or even actionable advice for employees as they approach dealing with difficult conversations within the workplace?
One thing I like to tell people, and I practice myself, is to seek to understand before seeking to be understood. And basically that means just thinking from that person's perspective. Just trying to
Mm.
take a walk in their shoes for just a moment to
Mm-hmm.
understand where they're coming from and what may have happened. You
Mm-hmm.
also want to stop and think, if there was a disagreement, rethink the conversation, rethink your actions. Did I do
Mm.
anything that may have
Yeah.
offended this person? Did
Yeah.
I do anything that may have caused the disagreement? So once you evaluate
Mm-hmm.
yourself, and also try to understand the other person, again, take
Mm-hmm.
a breath and approach
Yeah.
the situation with respect. And I like to take notes, but if you can manage it in your mind, just some talking points. You want to address
Yeah.
the issue,
I
but
like that.
sticking to the facts, like you said. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
this is what occurred, and this is the impact of what occurred, and then
Yeah.
move forward from that. You don't want to start by saying, "Well, you made me angry when you did this," because immediately the person's going to be on defense. So you
Right.
just want to
Right.
talk
Right.
about the facts, what actually occurred,
Yeah.
what that impact was, and then let's discuss a way to resolve that. Let's discuss how we move
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
And one thing before we move forward, let's make sure we recap that we're on the same page.
Right.
And
Right.
especially, whether it's peer to peer or it's a manager, documenting it. That's the wrap up piece.
Document. Hey, you got
Exactly.
to
Document
document it.
everything. I believe if it's not documented, it never happened. But also that
Hey.
helps you remember. It helps all parties
Right.
accurately remember what occurred, what was agreed on. If it happens to unfortunately come up again, we'll be able to say, let's refer to the notes. Remember in this
Right.
email, this is what we agreed. Um,
Right. One thing I would say is sometimes we overthink as humans. And
mhm,
so I think the first thing before you approach the conversation, number one, give that person the benefit of the doubt.
exactly.
Because we think that, oh, they're gonna react this way, or they're gonna say this, they're gonna
Yeah.
say that. Just give them the benefit of the doubt. And then sometimes you'll realize, hey, I'm coming to you just, being honest and just want to have this conversation with you,
Mhm.
bringing it to their awareness and their attention. And believe it or not, a lot of times you'll realize, oh, that was easy, right?
Yes.
But I think we have to have a conversation with ourselves first.
Mhm.
And we have to let ourselves know, like, hey, it's okay. It's okay that I'm feeling this way. Let's just
Mhm.
go have the conversation. So
Mhm.
sometimes we battle with that in our minds is, oh, dreading to have the conversation. But I think if you first deal with yourself and then say, hey, let me give them the benefit of the doubt, I think that you'll approach the conversation in a much better light.
That is
Mhm.
a great point you just made, because sometimes things get bigger because we let them build. We
Right.
delay
We
that
ignore
conversation, we delay
it.
addressing it. It gets bigger and bigger, and then one day
Hmm.
it gets on your last nerve.
Hmm.
Someone blows up and it gets out of hand. That's why it's best to address the issue when
Yeah.
it first arises, so that it doesn't become a problem.
Right. Right. I think that's so important. Nikita, let's get into our transparent moment
Okay.
where guests are able to send in questions and scenarios. so that we can answer if we were in their shoes. We have one from all the way from Florida. It says, I'm new to the company, and even though I haven't been there for a year, they still include me in their annual reviews. Right now, I have surpassed my 90 days. When I received my reviews from my boss, I was surprised to learn that my coworker had made negative comments about me, such as she asked too many questions regarding this process or that process, and she doesn't seem to be as confident in this role. My coworker even mentioned that I distract her from her daily job by asking simple questions about her weekend or plans. As a fully remote team member, I tend to be connected more with individuals outside of my immediate team. But now I feel discouraged from communicating with my coworker on a personal level. I'm new to the company, and this situation has me questioning if this is the right place for me. My question is, should I bring this up to my supervisor, who seems to be siding with my coworker and doesn't see anything wrong with her behavior towards me? Or should I just keep it to myself, work, clock in, clock out? What should I do?
Well, my first issue is with the supervisor because in a performance review, it should never be a surprise.
Mm,
If
okay.
her his or her peer had already brought some issues to
Hmm.
the supervisor should have spoken with the employee at that time.
Right.
You can't fix something you don't know about.
Right.
Um,
I think that's where the leader has to be a leader, and
absolutely.
they have to bridge the gap. If there are
Yeah.
issues going on, bring them two together. And then you mentioned that this shouldn't be a surprise, right? Now,
Right.
if this has been an ongoing thing, right? And it's like, okay, within your 90 days, this has come up and we've talked
Mhm.
about it, then hey, add it into the performance review,
Right.
but not as comments from the employee.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
What else you got?
It's sad to hear that that peer could potentially ruin this job for the person who submitted this
That's
because
true.
we want to be comfortable where we're working. We don't want to feel like we can't communicate with others. And
That's true.
a remote environment can be difficult. And it sounds like it's more difficult with that. But with that being said, it sounds like it's also a personality thing. So,
Mm,
what you
yeah.
mentioned about the manager bringing those people together and getting to know how they like to communicate, that would be very helpful. That's
Yeah.
where those assessments would come in so that a new person coming into the team
That's
can
true.
understand how to interact with his or her peers, also how to
Mhm.
interact with the supervisor. And of course, the supervisor knows how to work with each of his or her team members.
Right.
So, that all of that being said, then it would be best if the person who submitted it could talk to the supervisor and say, I'd really like to
Yeah.
meet with you and my teammate so that we could get a
Mhm.
better understanding of how to communicate with each other.
Absolutely. Right. I think that's the step I would take, right? Um, this is there's no right answer to this,
Mhm.
but I think, right, the approach to this, if I was the employee, I would probably go to my manager on a separate meeting from
Right.
the performance review,
Yes.
and just bring up some things that say, hey, you talked about this in my performance review, and I actually would like to have this conversation with you and the employee.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's what I would do. I would go to the manager and talk about it, but I think that maybe it may be some culture issues within the workplace
Yeah.
that the leader really needs to step up
Yeah.
and have that conversation.
Yeah.
So before we get out of here, Nikita, um, I want to give an encouraging Bible scripture that comes from Deuteronomy 31:6. And it says, be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread of them, for it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. I want to encourage someone that's listening today that God is with you as you have these difficult conversations in the workplace. Take him with you because he won't leave you nor forsake you. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, Nikita. And thank you all for listening to the Transparent HR podcast on our 4th episode. Remember to like, share, subscribe so that you can listen to the next episode that comes out. Also, be sure to submit any questions that you have for the podcast so we can answer them here on the show. Thank you so much and have a great day. Y'all have a good one.